Thank you, colleagues, for joining us this afternoon. If you listen to Professor Iman's strategies for, going between, from a survival brain to a learning brain, my question, or our question, is a little bit different. I'm wondering how you'll go from from your graveyard shift brain into a learning brain this afternoon, because the afternoon sessions are always difficult. But nevertheless, thanks in despite of that for joining us this afternoon. So okay, so I'm going to just make my team screen small. So if anybody wants to chip in before then, just let me know. Right. So we're going to talk to, as Nayo has alluded to, and this is a team effort, and very much indeed a team effort, because knowledge doesn't come, it never comes from one person or two people. It comes from somewhere, and we also like to acknowledge our contributors as indicated below. Right, so the outline is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to, it'll show itself. Basically, what we need to declare is the context for this presentation, which is the intent to a prospective chapter contribution, which will be edited by Professor Emmanuel Ojo. And the book's title is Transforming Postgraduate Education in South Africa, Appreciative Inquiry into Innovative Practice. And then specifically the subsection that we hope we could make a contribution to, and which is redefining supervision, innovative models and practices. But there's a bigger backdrop that we also would like to just share with you, and that is in fact the CLTD's gaze on postgraduate supervision capacitation, and that follows the investigation on the WITS state of postgraduate supervision that was executed or done in 2022 to 2023. An executive summary followed by Professor Grayson, Professor Bowman, and Dr. Vissing, and they recommended the CLTD ladder of learning, or perhaps a multilateral learning pathway, for capacitating our supervisors at WITS in competencies, but also in a multitude of an array. I can just see this whole tree connection with all the roots on all the their needs for supervision. And then these following policy documents are also supporting that. But that's the backdrop. So what we are going to talk to is then make an argument for why is it important for transformation in postgraduate supervision. Very short backdrop, but it's very important. Actually, the background is that the National Development Plan 2030, and that was published in 2011, aimed at eliminating poverty by 2030. And one of their central objectives was that there needs to be 5,000 doctoral graduates in South Africa per annum by 2030. Now, why is that important? Because, well, we all know that PhDs are highly employable, but it's more than that. It's also that the universities need to produce high-level skills to society. That's a central function of universities. So in other words, the graduates go out and they do a job, and they also can create jobs and be employees and employers. Need enough PhDs to train the next generation students. So that means they're aimed about 40% of enrolled PhDs. Well, the bottom line is currently 40% of enrolled PhD students are academics, and only 50% of academics have PhDs. So that leaves us with a problem. But thirdly, also to produce knowledge economy and knowledge society. So that's a big, because when you in that discourse, you have a lot more leverage. Okay, but the problem is that we need more resources and we need more money in the system. The whole notion of the fact that most of our PhDs take 5 to 6 years completion has an extremely big knock-on effect in terms of throughput. Right, and then a very other important context is that this is really important for the whole of the continent of Africa. We see that by 2017, the figures has already increased significantly, and the number of PhD graduates per million has increased to 54. But the bottom line is that that our current stats tells us that notion is actually going downward. Right. The other important problem about quality is that the Council of Higher Education launched an important investigation in 2017 where they requested 28 self-review reports from different institutions, all the public ones and some private ones, about the quality of PhD programs in terms of admission, administration, everything about PhD programs. Now, the good thing is that they are really good practices, but there are also shortcomings in terms of knowledge attributes and skill attributes. And there's a lot about that that we're not going to be able to cover in this session. And the bottom line is there is a significant variations across institutions, regardless of the relatively small higher education sector that we do have. And that makes the notion of, or the fact of quality of doctoral degrees and the potential threat to that a real big problem. Okay. So we've heard several times that the universities as a whole has significant problems regarding their legitimacy in terms of relevance and sensitivity to students' realities. But globally, the universities are actually all struggling with timely throughput of all of those students, and the dropout rates are also mentionable. We have increased student intake, which is a good thing because that's what the National Development Plan suggested and which we are actually moving towards. But we also having that increased intake without corresponding postgraduate success. So the CHE report, and that's the most recent stats, but it's still supported by institutional stats, including VIT stats, is that despite the higher throughput, dropout rate has also increased significantly, and we have examples there. But, and this is the crux of a lot of the problematization that we are discussing this afternoon, that despite the low timely throughput and the high dropout rates, what are the reasons? Because that is what we need to understand. What, as Dr. Vissing said this morning, what can we learn from this? And there are a lot of literature has pretty much a lot of overlap into 4 main categories, or you can call it themes as well. What are the reasons for this phenomenon of low timely throughput and high dropout rates? Personal, that which includes family responsibilities, work-life balance, limited support, change in health. We have structural funding as always a central issue, especially in the most unequal country in the world. Institutional administrative barriers, technical support of institutions, limited leave from work, isolation. We know isolation is a big problem. Knowledge and skills that you actually need to embark on the study. So not only to complete the study, but what about academic writing and research methodology, the research process? Those are skills that students have identified that they're walking blindly into this journey of research without having adequate skills and knowledge about these aspects. But then, of course, the central nexus of our conversation this afternoon, and that is supervision. And why is supervision a problem? That includes strained relationships and conflict, limited expertise of the supervisor in terms of all of the aspects that the student need to cover in research. Feedback that is either or ineffective and or delayed. Supervisor's workload. We know that that's a big problem, and therefore supervision time available, and supervisor's accessibility. There's lots of vignettes and lots of evidence, of students just saying, like, I just can't, no matter what I do, I can't get a hold of my supervisor because of my supervisor's schedule.
Thanks, Tania.
Oh, sure. Are we at slide 9? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Nazira. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tania. So colleagues, I'm going to focus on the historical trajectory if we're going to look at our supervision practices, but we need to have an understanding of why and where it comes from. So building upon the understanding of colonialism's, lingering effects in higher education, specifically in postgrad supervision, it's actually important for us to examine the ways in which these historical injustices continue to manifest in the supervisory relationship. And postgraduate supervision at its best is a partnership where knowledge is co-constructed and students are empowered to explore their research topics from diverse epistemological standpoints. However, within the context where colonial epistemological driftwood persists, the supervisory dynamic can actually reinforce hierarchies of knowledge, which perpetuates the marginalization of non-Western intellectual traditions. And the concept of epistemic justice actually highlights this often very subtle and unexamined ways, of which certain forms of knowledge are dismissed or deemed illegitimate. And in postgrad supervision, this actually can happen when, supervisors prioritize established Western research paradigms, methodologies, and theoretical frameworks over alternative approaches rooted in indigenous, Afrocentric, or decolonial perspectives. And this actually reinforces dominance of Western epistemologies and marginalizes students who actually wish to engage with non-Western knowledge systems, and particularly those who, as a matter of personal identity and intellectual orientation, actually seek to decolonize their research. Excuse me. So the Fees Must Fall movement, Tania, can you move to the next one? The Fees Must Fall movement, with its call to decenter Western epistemologies, pivots actually as a powerful reminder for us, of this necessity of transforming not just curricula, but the entire academic culture, including postgrad supervision. And this movement actually advocates for us to shift away from alienating academic practices that sometimes render non-Western students and their intellectual traditions invisible, or sometimes insignificant. And it promotes a model of supervision that is deeply reflective, responsive, and committed to cultivating epistemic diversity. But nonetheless, the neoliberal imperatives dominating higher ed actually complicate the matters, further in this dynamic. And we all know that the pressure to publish or perish, to rapidly ascend academic ranks and to meet institutionally defined metrics for success can sometimes incentivize supervisors to prioritize research outputs that align with the dominant knowledge systems. And I think this is more evident, in our pressure to actually publish in high impact journals, and many of these journals actually privilege Western methodologies and theoretical approaches. And, as Tania has stated, she has published certain aspects, and she suggests that these pressures are actually inherently, what's the word you use, Tania? Anti-pluriversal. Yeah. As they undermine the possibility of engaging with the multiplicity of knowledge systems, and they reduce the space actually for intellectual experimentation and critical engagement with what I mentioned previously, the Afrocentric centric methodologies. And, sadly, in this environment, postgrad students who actually wish to break away from these hegemonic norms may actually find themselves constrained by limited institutional support, or supervisors. Sometimes it's knowingly or even unknowingly, they steer them, back towards established Western-centric research practices. The next slide, please. So what is supervision? And we know it's a multifaceted responsibility in academia that actually intersects with the core pillars of academic life, like research, learning and teaching, and academic citizenship. So, but I think it extends beyond mere oversight of research. It actually focuses on a deep engagement with your students' overall academic journey, including their professional and their personal development. And in research-intensive universities like WITS, UCT, UP, and the other intensives, I think at WITS we ought to be priding ourselves on being one of the leading research hubs in South Africa. And supervision is critical in shaping, future scholars. And with a student population, this was as of 2024, I think we over 41,000, of which 40% are postgrad students. The role of supervision is crucial. It's even more pronounced in ensuring the quality and the impact of our research outputs. So we are responsible as supervisors for steering, our students towards successful completion of their research, but also for preparing them to meaningfully contribute to their respective academic fields and society at large. I'm not going to go through each of those pillars because I believe that we all know, the paradigms of research, learning and teaching, and academic citizenship. Can we move to the next one? So supervision is an evolving practice, and while the traditional one-on-one model has been dominant for centuries, research shifts, in higher ed around postgrad supervision suggest that, of course, we know this is not the only viable or effective approach. Previously or historically or trajectory, supervision has often followed this master-apprentice model where the student learns from a more experienced academic. And this model actually has its roots in medieval universities, and it has persisted in various forms. And subsequently, it provided a solid framework, for the development of research skills, particularly in the early stages of your student's project, your proposal or your protocol development and so forth. However, this particular model also comes with many limitations because the CHE actually raised this in their report on postgraduate supervision. Like the one-on-one approach can contribute to that sense of isolation, not only for students, but also for supervisors, because we want to be a part of it, but we also need to keep that balance, in terms of how we're mentoring, coaching, and supervising our students. And this isolation can, in fact, have detrimental effects on our students because they may feel actually disconnected from the broader academic community. And we may actually bear the burden of individual responsibility for our students. And this comes from that report. And subsequently, this pressure or this isolation can lead to increased pressure and stress, which further complicates this supervisory relationship. There's increasing recognition that alternative models of supervision may offer significant, benefits, like your group supervision models that has gained traction in recent years, actually, it's not recent, to broader networks of peers and ideas. And these actually allow your students to engage with multiple perspectives, which fosters this rich intellectual environment. And it actually reduces multiple, or rather, it reduces the burden on a single individual. Then this is one that Tania and I have been looking at. We got the cohort-based supervision, which is another alternative, and it brings students together in structured learning communities where they collaboratively navigate the challenges of postgraduate research. Fortunately, on my side, when I was completing my PhD, my supervisors actually worked through this cohort model where we had students doing their masters and PhDs, and it actually depended on the level of, I think how deep we were into our study. So all those who worked at, in the literature review stage or in the theoretical/conceptual framework stage, then we sat together and we worked together. And this collaborative way of working actually benefited us as well as our supervisors. So while one-on-one supervision retains its place, in the academic landscape, it is actually no longer the only viable model. According to authorities out there, even according to the CHE, because there's growing evidence that group and cohort-based models, but they need to be designed thoughtfully, can offer significant advantages in terms of reducing this isolation that I previously mentioned. Tania, the next slide, please. So as you can see, that supervisory relationship or way of doing and being is a complex and multifaceted process that involves the supervisor assuming various roles throughout that research journey, because it's a long journey. And there's many nuances that come in and complexities, throughout that journey. And authors such as Radhakrishna and others emphasize, this was based on a systematic review, by the way, the supervisor's involvement and the specific roles that they assume can vary significantly depending on the phase of the research and the needs of the student, which is what I actually explained when I went through this journey. Okay, and of course, during the protocol development phase, for instance, it's crucial, for the supervisor to take on that active role. I'm co-supervising with another colleague of mine from a different faculty, and because we are at this proposal stage with our supervisee, we meet with her every week just to give her that support, knowing where her gaps are and assisting her to think differently as well. All right. And this requires detailed guidance, and the student actually navigates the early, complexities of framing the research questions and so forth. And then beyond the protocol phase, we actually shift along a continuum that takes into account your student's motivation, the supervisor relationship, and the research environment and the nature of how this project is going to be assessed and the support needed. So there's various, ways of supervising and various depths at which the supervisor has to step in. So for me, the role of the postgraduate supervisor is not static, it's fluid, because you've got to adapt to the needs of the student, the phase of your supervisor's research, and the institutional context as well. And I think by recognizing this continuum and being flexible in our approach, we can provide that necessary support to guide our students through the complexities of postgraduate research. But while we do that, we need to ensure that we foster their independence and their scholarly growth. Over to you, Tania.
Thank you, Nazira, for your eloquent contribution. Okay, so you guys, I know that we are actually towards the end of the time, but let us just quickly share with you what we have in mind, and we would really, really love to hear your thoughts on that. That's how knowledge gets co-created, is by input. But basically, we thought about two phases, and the first one is to understand better. The aim for it is to understand better supervision practices that are linked with timely throughput of students. And phase two, then, and this is where our abstract, we need to honor our abstract in terms of the Hicks dignity model as a supervision model to counter historical colonial epistemological driftwood of supervision. And there's already a lot of resonance here with what we heard about the Hicks model, with resonance that we heard with, humanizing pedagogy and rehumanizing practices. So very shortly, our phase one, we thought about it will be an explorative descriptive design. We'll already ask BIS to match students who had a good throughput with concomitant supervisors, and then invite them to an appreciative inquiry interview. And for phase two, it'll be a little bit more diverse, in the sense of that we could oscillate between quantitative and qualitative data. And then in terms of a population sampling, of course, it will always be the supervisors and the graduates and students, depending, on I guess on the level of vulnerability, because students who are in the system are very often reluctant to share their real experiences, because they do remain vulnerable to before they graduate. And then for our Higgs, we thought about a critical case sampling, which will be a little bit more diverse, and also the levels. We're not going to have time to talk to the Higgs dignity model, but I will strongly encourage you to read the book. The model comes from a conflict management, is very well theorized. She actually applied this model between countries in post-conflict or in conflict situations, and then later on it moved to corporate management. But we haven't found evidence for its efficacy in relational supervision, and we think that it might be a really great model as a counter to the colonial driftwood that we will have to navigate still for decades to come. But it has 10 elements to it, and like I said, unfortunately, I won't be able to go through, but I'll be happy to send you we will be happy to send you the PowerPoint. But and what is really great about this model, it's also there's also really astute suggestions for how to teach this to people. So, this is how it'll come into the phase 2, and moreover, what it looks like when it's not there. So, what does a relationship look like when when the dignity is not upheld? And that type of logos approach is really quite powerful. Of course, there's always critical considerations because for each theory, there's something that is visible, and then there's something that's also hidden, of course. So we need to keep that in mind. Right, so our possible implications, of course, we hope would involve learning-centeredness approach that allows osmosis between student learning and educated-centeredness, an emphasis on relationality of supervisee and supervisor relationship, adult-to-adult posture, which is really, really important to address the political nature of this relationship towards countering colonial epistemologies. And then, of course, a cohort supervision models that together with the dignity model can generate a sense of community and practice engagement, where everybody learns from each other. There's less isolation, and there's other theoretical benefits. It's like community of practice or engagement. And hopefully, we'd like to see that this makes an impact on the throughput and success rate of students. Thank you for your patience. Thank you certainly very much for being here. And thank you to CLTD for the opportunity to have been part of this and as a team. Thanks, Naz. It was great to be on the team with you as well and going forward.